There's a pattern that I've noticed through the course of my life. It's sort of a psychological phenomenon, and it has three basic steps to it. The first, or at least I thought it did, the first step is that you start with some sort of practical constraint or practical dependency. So in other words, you are going to do something for a practical reason. And I'll go through an example of this in a minute. So you have a practical reason to do something. The second step is that you begin to view the practical step as something that entices you to do the second thing, whatever it's dependent on, or whatever the thing you're trying to accomplish is. And then the third step, so you've got practical dependency. You have a step where by doing the practical piece, it sort of sets you up for whatever it is. And the third piece is that you become dependent on that initial practical step in order to feel as if you even can accomplish the second piece. I know that was all very abstract, so let me go through an example. I'm not sure I'm explaining it very well. So, for example, I'm not saying this particular chain of events necessarily is one that's happened to me, but I'm going to use it as it's kind of a simple example. I work out. I like to lift weights, work out, into fitness, that kind of stuff. So, first step, in order to go work out, in order to go lift weights, I need to put on a pair of gym shoes. Practical thing, right? There's no reason that I wouldn't need to put on gym shoes in order to go work out. So that's step one. Over time, putting on the gym shoes makes my body feel ready for the workout. You see the difference there? In one case, in order to work out, I need to put on shoes. Over time, though, it flips eventually where putting on the shoes makes me feel ready for the workout. So that's step two. And step three becomes, eventually down the road, it's almost impossible, it's almost unthinkable that I can be ready to do a workout without putting on the shoes. So it becomes a necessary, almost superstitious step to things. So again, just to outline it one more time, start with a practical step, need to put on shoes to work out. Number two, putting on the shoes makes you feel prepared for whatever it is you're going to do. So you putting on the shoes makes you feel prepared for the workout. Step three, in your head, it becomes almost a point of superstition where unless you put on the shoes in an exact way, at an exact time, you feel as if you won't be able to work out or you won't have a good workout or whatever. So it becomes sort of a superstitious thing. And I've noticed this pattern with a number of things over the course of my life, where something that initially started as just a practical necessity eventually becomes a psychological dependency. So I didn't know what this was. I had never done any research into it. I had never looked up to see, is this a thing or am I just, a bag of nuts? Like, what's going on here? So I spent a little bit of time looking this up. And lo and behold, there is a term for this. It is called psychological entrenchment. So I've only begun with research on this, and I was doing it mostly through, AI tools like ChatGPT. So forgive any glaring inaccuracies, but this all sounds pretty plausible to me. Turns out the research on this goes way back. In terms of as long as psychology has been really studied in any formal way. And it's also interdisciplinary. It spans several disciplines. So the first piece of this, as one would expect, is very Pavlovian. It's very classical conditioning, right? So going from step one to step two, going from needing to put the shoes on in order to work out, over to step two, where it's putting the shoes on makes you feel ready to work out, that is textbook classical conditioning. So a lot of the research, of course, at least initially, stems from that, at least for that first part of things. Interestingly, I mean, that research goes as far back as the late 1800s and early 1900s. But in and of itself, there was that and some other scattered things, but the real core piece was that classical conditioning piece. But they hadn't gone any further than that necessarily. Jump forward a little while, early 1900s up until maybe even the mid 1900s, you get more into this research around habits. And interestingly, this term of habit loops starts to show up in the research. The idea of habit loops really becoming that over time, people will automatically follow whatever habits they have formed, they will sort of automatically follow without ever reevaluating why. That's when this kind of early 1900s into the mid 1900s is really when this research is kind of coming into fruition, along with some other interesting research that starts to get into the research of organizations. And I expect, and I didn't look at the correlation here, but I expect that this goes hand in hand with a lot of management research that was being done at the time. So one of the things that they found organizationally is that just like any person with your habits that you don't really reevaluate, leaders and managers do the same thing. And they find that they continue to dive into ineffective strategies just because they feel tied to whatever past choices they made, not necessarily because that strategy is bearing any fruit at that point in time. And then you move out into a later body of research that starts getting into the early 2000s and late 1900s, early 2000s, that really starts talking about, and there's a piece of this that has by a lot like the neuroscience, like how your brain is actually formed and how your brain actually operates, can become entrenched, where the pathways that initially have to form, as they form and they get repeated over and or get used over and over again, they become better and better doing the same patterns. You get into all these things around inflexibility within organizations and within people. They find research around the higher degree of expertise you have in something, the harder it is for you to change your behavior patterns, all those sort of things. So when you put all this research together, you end up with various terms around this. You end up with things like psychological entrenchment, neurorigidity, the idea that you become very rigid in your habits and very rigid in your thinking. So earlier I'd said that there was really 3 steps to this as I had seen it, right? You had this first step of just having to do something practical. The term for this in the field is practical routine. It's a behavior. It serves a clear function. You do a thing as a dependency to do something else. Then it goes into a psychological association as step 2, which is this idea that now when you put those gym shoes on, you feel ready for the workout. And this phase is a psychological association. You then move into ritualization, which is that 3rd step that I was talking about, where you begin to believe that the behavior is essential in order to perform well at whatever the last thing is. But there's a 4th step, which maybe this is the piece where things get kind of, I don't know if dangerous is the right word, but where things sort of break out of that box of just practicality, and you end up in this phase of entrenchment and rigidity, where not only do you feel that you need to do that in order to have whatever that, you need to put the shoes on in a certain way in order to have a good workout. Now you literally cannot think of any world where you don't do that, and it causes you discomfort and anxiety. And a lot of psychology, of course, is backed by this concept of like these underlying anxieties that are always with you, and they impact your behavior in certain ways and all these things. But in this case, it's that change, that movement from, oh, I really need to put these shoes on in order to have the good workout. And that moves beyond into, now I'm actually anxious. I go to do a workout without it, and not only do I think it's not going to be a great workout, I'm jittery about it, and it's in the back of my head, and I can't get it out. Again, I'm not sure how well this specific example necessarily plays through all these steps, because at least for me, I don't think I would get to that phase with this, but I can think of other examples where you might. But anyway, I just thought it was an interesting phenomenon, something that I had noticed over the course of my life that I never had a name for. I didn't really even know if it was a thing, but this idea of psychological entrenchment just being a really interesting topic, being something that I just learned to put a word to, and now have an interesting mental model around it, and found kind of this fourth step to things, which I wasn't really thinking about, which is that if you ever find yourself in one of these patterns where you have a practical thing that becomes a ritualized thing, that becomes a practical thing that becomes sort of an association, that becomes a ritual, that then moves you into a place where you literally can't function without anxiety if you don't follow the ritual, that's probably when things have gone too far, and you need to find a way to kind of back that behavior out. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to... These things are useful while they are doing things positively, right? And the first two steps are fairly positive. The first step is really one around, I just need to put the shoes on to do the workout. That's a positive thing. Like, no reason not to put the shoes on. Even the second step, where you start putting the shoes on and you feel ready, that's a positive thing. It's a good thing. Starts to turn a little bit in that third step, where you start feeling, oh, if I don't put the shoes on in a certain way, now I'm not going to have a good workout. And you definitely won't want to get to the fourth step, where if you are unable to do so, you are literally anxious and uncomfortable without it. So just something to evaluate, a mental framework for things that might come up in your life. Hope it's useful.